This is the remote control for RCA's incredible new special effects VCR. SelectaVision 625 with slow motion, fast forward, stop action, and the maximum record time available, 6 hours. Only RCA has SelectaVision 625. Special effects, now in a 6-hour VCR. Let RCA turn your television into SelectaVision.
Hello everybody once again. I am so excited to show you guys the subject of today's video. This is an RCA model Vdt625 Vhs Vcr, and it was made in 1980. This is a very early VHS VCR. When this VCR was built, VHS had just been introduced to North America only 3 years ago. And in fact, much of this VCR's design traces back to the first VHS VCR sold in North America, the RCA Vdt625 from 1977. And although there were many advancements and improvements made between the Vdt625 and this Vdt625, there are still a lot of things that remain the same as well. So I am super excited to have what is very much an example of the early North American VHS VCRs. I bought this on shopgoodwill.com 2 years ago. It was just when the pandemic hit North America, and I had it shipped to, at the time, my girlfriend's house, and then suddenly the border closed, and I couldn't come get this thing. And then a year after that, my girlfriend and I split up. And then a few months after that, I had to find a storage unit for her to put this and all the other stuff that I had in her house into. And so for the last 10 months until now, this sat in a non-climate controlled storage unit where a rodent, probably a rat, had broken into it, chewed on some boxes, and pooped absolutely everywhere. So just the fact that it sat in non-climate controlled storage alone, which means this thing sat in a hot, humid summer and then in a cold winter. When I finally got this thing into my hands just a couple of weeks ago, I thought there was no way in hell that this is ever going to work again. Especially after I had a bad experience with another early VCR that I had gotten back in, I think it was late 2019. It was an RCA Vdt625, a unit just a year newer than this, that I never got working. It wouldn't go into play mode. I have no idea what was wrong with it. I ended up sending it to another VCR enthusiast, and I actually contacted him just today. I said, hey, did you ever get that VCR working? He hasn't worked on it yet. It's just been sitting. But I had between the bad experience I had with that VCR, this one sitting in non-climate controlled storage for 10 months, I thought it would be an absolute miracle if this thing ever worked again. Well, apparently miracles exist, because not only did I get this thing working, it works fine! It works beautifully! It produces a great picture, and it makes great recordings. And it functions perfectly. There is nothing wrong with this at all. This thing works beautifully. I couldn't believe it. And a couple of days after I got this, I had a live stream where some of you guys joined. There was about 15 of you, where I cleaned this thing up and I took it apart and I cleaned the insides and you know, lubricated and cleaned, and then I, you know, exercised it a bunch. And in the beginning, during that stream, this thing produced an awful picture. The recordings were kinda so-so, but playback of recordings from other VCRs, or at least the VCR that I made a test tape with, was just awful, especially at the slower LP and SLP speeds. Well, But the more I exercised this, the better it became, and now it works great. It has no problem playing tapes recorded in other VCRs, and its own recordings are just stellar. So I am feeling very, very lucky to get to own a very early VHS VCR that actually works and it's usable, and I'm super excited to show this to you guys today. So this machine was made by Panasonic. All of RCA's early VCRs were made by Panasonic until the mid-80s when RCA switched to Hitachi as their OEM. I owned a Hitachi RCA branded VCR. It was my RCA VPT292 from 1987, which I no longer have. The thing worked basically until the pinch roller got so hard and so cracked that it began damaging tapes, and electronically it started getting a bit funny as well. But this is a rebrand of the Panasonic OmniVision model PV1650. So when you look at this thing, you see a lot of hallmarks of the early VHS VCRs. First of all, this thing is a top loader. You hit the eject button, it comes up very enthusiastically, and you stick in your tape, and you're ready to go. Another hallmark, the piano key tape transport controls, and these are mechanical. You also have a mechanical pause control, and as a consequence of this piano key control is no forward search or reverse search. You know, when you can speed the tape in either direction and still see the picture. This doesn't have that. If you want to move to somewhere else on the tape, you've got to commit to it. You've got to hit stop, and then you've got to hit rewind or fast forward, and then you've got to hit stop, and then you've got to hit play and hope you're in the right place. Now, there is an asterisk to that. This model, it was marketed as the SelectaVision 625. You can see the SelectaVision there, which RCA used on their early VCRs and on the very failed SelectaVision video disc system that RCA themselves invented and sold. The SelectaVision 625 was basically a SelectaVision 600, the model VDT600, but it did come with a remote. It was a wired remote that plugs into a remote jack on the back. And among other things, what the remote provides is a forward search and reverse search. It's entirely electronic. You press a button on the remote and the capstan motor electronically speeds up or starts moving in the other direction. So if I had the remote for this thing, which I don't, unfortunately, I would have forward search and reverse search. But because I don't have the remote, I don't have that functionality. And of course the VDT600 and all the other lower end machines, they didn't come with a remote, so you didn't have that functionality anyway. So functionally, without the remote, this is the same as a VDT600. Here's a big first that this generation of RCA VCR introduced. It was the SLP speed. SLP was not an original part of the VHS specification. As a matter of fact, even LP was not an original part of the VHS specification. When JVC introduced the first VHS VCR in 1976, it only had the SP speed, and JVC was not willing to put a slower speed for reasons of degradation of the video and especially the audio quality. Well, when RCA was fixing to introduce a VHS VCR in North America, they weren't having that. They wanted a longer recording time, specifically, and this was literally the benchmark, RCA wanted a VCR that could record an American football game, which usually lasts around 4 hours. So RCA wanted to market a VCR made by somebody willing to put a longer recording time. And that somebody was Panasonic. RCA went to Panasonic, said, we want a VHS VCR, JVC won't put a longer recording time in, will you do it? And Panasonic said, it might not work that great, but sure, we'll do it. And they did it. The RCA Vdt625 had the LP recording speed, and that was one of the biggest reasons that VHS ended up beating Betamax, was because Sony as well were not willing to put a longer recording time on Betamax until it was too late. Also, Betamax is a smaller cassette, so it would have had to have moved even slower than VHS at LP to fit a 4-hour recording. So RCA's VCRs were the first with the LP recording speed, pretty much, right from the get-go solidified VHS as the consumer favorite. For the 1979-1980 model year, they introduced SLP for 6-hour recording on a standard 2-hour tape. There were 2 models in the VDT line that had it. There was this one, or I guess 3 when you count the VDT600. This one, the VDT600, and the VDT501. They introduced the SLP speed. The VDT501 was lower end than this in that it actually had a rotary mechanical tuner rather than the electronic TV tuner that's built into this one. JVC did end up around the same time coming out with a VCR that could do SLP, but it could only do SP and SLP. It could not do LP, oddly enough. But RCA's units do all 3. Now, while this unit and the lower end VDT501 both introduce the SLP speed, this one does it better because this is a 4-head unit. VDT501 was only a 2-head unit, so far worse video quality on the LP and SLP speeds. This guy has 4 heads, 2 of the heads are dedicated to the SLP speed, so you get much better video quality at SLP than you otherwise would have. So I do believe that does make this the first 4-head VCR, at least sold in North America. Another fancy pants feature this thing had that the lower end models didn't is a multi-program timer. This was actually introduced on the VCT400 in the 1978-79 model year. This model continued with that. You can have up to 4 timer programs, so you can set this thing, you can program up to 4 times for it to automatically begin recording and then stop recording, and it's a 7-day timer. You can program this thing for up to a week ahead for it to begin recording. And we'll demonstrate the timer recording on this in this video. You get a very basic VFD display on these early VCRs, just a clock with AM and PM. There is a additional digit here which comes into play when you're programming the timer. You get a mechanical tape counter with a reset switch and a memory function, so when memory is turned on and you hit rewind, it'll automatically stop when the counter hits 0. Very nice. Again, your TV tuner, an LED for automatic fine tuning, which you can turn on and off. And it's actually a Varactor tuner, so when I flip down this front panel, ooh, there you go. You program what channels are in these basically memory keys by manually turning these rotary dials to tune the channel itself. You turn these dials, there's an outer part of the dial and an inner part, so you set the outer part. There's only 3 settings for VHF low, VHF high, and UHF, and then you turn the dial, and you might be able to see there's a little marker above there. It's like tuning a radio. You have to turn this dial, and the little white marker there slowly moves across, and it can actually take quite a bit of time if you have to tune from one end of the band all the way to the other to get to the channel you want. And when you're done programming the channel you want for each of the channel locations, you put a little, basically a sticker or a little label inside there to mark what channel it is. So how you change the channel number labels is there's a little door here. You got to stick your finger under and pop it open like that, and then it pulls out. And there you go. And then you can pop out each label and replace it. Here's what the bare thing looks like. When you're done, you just pop it back in and close the door. Just like that. Also under the front cover we have the tracking control. This is manual tracking, of course. Your automatic fine-tuning switch, which you would normally keep turned on unless you were actually tuning the tuners, then you'd want it turned off. And your input selector, either the TV tuner built into the VCR or a setting called camera. Well, camera is actually your AV input. This does have a composite video input along with audio as the standard RCA jacks like any newer VCR would have. But they called it the camera input because at the time, there weren't satellite receivers. Cable boxes were a thing, but normally they just had a channel 3 output that you would run into the RF input on a VCR if you wanted to record off of cable. The only thing back in this day that they would imagine you using a composite input for was a video camera. Camcorders did not exist yet when this VCR was made, but video cameras did. And when you had a video camera, they either had a DIN plug on them, a proprietary or semi-proprietary plug that plugged into a portable VCR, or some desktop VCRs had a DIN plug on them as well. This one doesn't. Or you would plug the camera into basically a tiny home version of a CCU, where the camera's DIN plug would plug into the CCU, and then the CCU would plug into the wall for power, but it would also give you composite out and audio out, and that's what you'd plug into the composite input on this thing. That's the only thing they ever imagined you using a line input for on a VCR, so they called it camera. And that's what's behind this front cover. You can see, of course, I went through the rigmarole of explaining how to tune the TV tuner, but it does explain it right here. So that's that. And then our switches over here. We've got our on-off power switch, a select switch, which when it's in the TV position, your TV, it basically just bypasses the VCR entirely, and whatever's connected to the RF input just passes through to the RF output to your TV. I believe it passes through to the AV output as well. This does have an AV output, so you don't have to just use the RF output to connect to your TV or monitor. And then our speed selection, which is a very nice tactile toggle switch as well. And although you can, hard select the recording speed with this switch, you don't have to manually tell the VCR what speed a tape is recorded in for playback. It still does that automatically using the control track like any modern VCR does. So this only applies to recording. Towards the right of our transport controls, we have an audio dub switch. So this does have an audio dub feature, which in later years you really only saw on the highest end VCRs. But basically, you press this during playback, and what it does is it leaves the existing video recording alone, but when you press this, it begins erasing the existing audio track, and it activates the audio input. So if you, say, had a home movie that you made using a video camera and a VHS porta-pack, let's say, and at the time, it wasn't as common to narrate on camera as it is today when we record videos with our phones and stuff. Normally, if you had a video camera and a portable VCR and you went out and shot a movie with it, you did it silently. You either had just the ambient sounds recorded onto the tape, or your video camera might not have had a microphone connected to it at all, and it would just be a silent video. And then once you got your movie home and you popped it in your home VCR, you could play it, hit audio dub, and then with an attached microphone, you could record your narration onto the tape after the fact. So that's what this was for. And actually, this does have a microphone input. Right there, it's got a 1/4-inch mic jack. I have not tried it yet, but I should try it for this video, so we'll find out together if that works. You've got your power LED, and if you do and there's too much moisture inside the unit, it will detect that, turn this do light on, and the VCR will be inoperable until it detects that the moisture has gone away. Let's take a look at programming a timer and everything that's under this cover. Alright. First of all, we have a dim bright switch for the VFD, which is very nice. So if you had this thing in a bedroom, didn't want the VFD lighting up the room at night with the wrath of a million suns, you could turn the brightness down. Your mode switch here, normally you just have manual selected. If you need to set the clock after a power outage, turn it to clock set. And then you have your hour and minute selectors right here, and they go forward and backwards. How nice and convenient is that? Very nice. And you set your AM, PM, just like that. So that's the clock set mode. And then when you want to program a timer, set your selector to program. The display changes. That additional digit, which is much brighter than the digits for the clock, just because the VFD probably sat displaying just the clock for years. But that comes into play. First you select what timer are you programming, A, B, C, or D. You can choose whichever one you want. We'll just start with A. And what this additional digit is showing is how many days from today is this recording going to take place. That's how you set what day it's recording. This thing doesn't account for days of the week, you know, Monday, Tuesday, none of that. It's just how many days from today is this recording taking place. 0 is today. We use this day forward or reverse switch. Oops. 1 is tomorrow, 1 day from now. 2 days from now, so the day after tomorrow. Oh, switch is a little bouncy apparently. 3 days from today, 4 days from today, etc. up to 6 days from today. And then there's an additional choice, A, which means the recording is going to take place every day. So it'll record at the same time every day. So if I was making a recording for tomorrow, I'd set that to 1. And this second switch, start and length, we're going to have it set to start first because we're going to set our start time. So my recording tomorrow starts at 8 a.m., let's say. So I'll set this to 8 a.m. And then it needs to know how long it's got to record, right? So we're going to go back to our second switch, change it to length. And now this is what it shows, and we're going to set how long our recording is. If it's 1 hour, there, it's going to record for an hour. 30 minutes, set it to 30 minutes. And you can set it down to the minute. You want it to record a 2-minute commercial break? There you go, set it for 2 minutes. And that's what it does. So once you're done programming your timer, you can go on to the other ones and start setting those too. If you decide you don't want to program a timer, you just hit the clear button and it clears it. You can see our first program is still there. And once you've done all the programming you want, you move the switch to timer on. And it goes back to the clock. What you have to do now, in order to ensure that the thing's actually going to record, is you have to turn your power on. But you'll notice the power light does not come on. However, the timer light is on now. So it's all set to record, but of course we got to put a tape in too. So we'll put our tape in. And you know, this is a big difference between programming on a VCR like this and on newer VCRs. we have to manually engage record. And there we go. And it's not actually doing anything. It won't do anything until tomorrow at 8 a.m. when it'll automatically turn the power on and begin recording. And 2 minutes later, it will automatically stop recording. And these will pop up. It can automatically do that. And the recording program will be finished. And that's it. That's timer recording. If you have some timers set, but in the meantime you want to watch something, you have to turn timer mode off. So you have to engage stop, or else it's going to immediately begin recording whatever when I turn it back to manual mode. But we just turn it back to manual mode, and the VCR is now turned on normally, ready to do whatever. And when you're all done watching your movie or whatever, you're just going to make sure to turn it back to timer on and engage record. And it's all set to record your scheduled programming when the time comes. I almost forgot, you also have to tell it what channel you're going to be recording, because this can automatically select the channel. So it currently has lit up what channel you're currently watching, but when you're in the programming mode, you press what channel you're going to watch and it'll automatically switch to that channel. That is, of course, assuming you have the input selector set to tuner. If you have the input selected to camera, like I have right now, none of this matters. It's going to record what's on the camera input. So you got to make sure your tuner camera switch is in the right place as well. This unit's predecessors, as well as the lower end models of this model year, only had a single event timer. Program what time you want it to start recording, how long it's going to be, and that's all you get. And the reason, of course, is because they had rotary tuners for the channel selection. So only you could choose the channel. So when you programmed your one timer program, you had to set the channel and leave it there, so that it would record on the right channel when the time came. We are now looking at the back of the unit. On the top here we have our RF output channel 3 or 4. So of course most people would have been connecting their TV sets to this using the RF output. That's actually what I'm doing here. And that just sets what channel to tune your TV to. Here's all our inputs and outputs, our RF out, of course, our RF in, which you'd connect either your antenna if you watched over the air TV or your cable box to. And you have your twin lead terminals for your UHF out and in. And the reason there's a UHF out when only the VHF out is used when you're playing a tape to your TV is because, of course, when the VCR is turned off, these are just pass-throughs. The RF in passes through to the RF out, and the UHF in passes through to the UHF out. So that way you don't need a splitter or whatever to connect your antenna to both your VCR and your TV. There's your composite inputs and outputs. And this remote pause jack is not the remote jack. This is a jack dedicated to use on a video camera. So the CCU of your video camera in 1980 may have had a plug that could plug into this, and then your thumb button, like a modern camcorder has to start and stop recording. Video cameras had that too, and it activates this remote pause switch to make the VCR start recording or stop recording. Very nice. The actual remote control jack is right here. You've got a DIN plug, and I almost wonder if I could find a pinout for that online. I haven't looked yet, but if I can find a pinout, wouldn't that be neat to build my own remote control just using a bunch of buttons that presumably all they have to do is short each of those DIN pins to one that is ground. That would be kind of neat, and then I could have reverse and forward search on this thing. 39 watts, made in Japan. Data manufacturer, April 9th, 1980. And that's everything on the back. Unfortunately, I am missing a chunk out of the back panel here. I have a bad feeling that was in the box that this thing was shipped in, and I didn't look. I obviously didn't notice it in the box, and perhaps if I had dug deeper, I may have found it. Oops. But yeah, for literal health reasons, I had to get the box this thing was shipped in out of this place as soon as I could. This thing actually had a lot of broken plastic. In fact, every plastic lug on this back panel that's used to screw it into place was broken. One of the lugs for this top panel was broken off as well. And I was able to piece it all back together like Humpty Dumpty. Permatex plastic welder is some of the most amazing stuff I've ever seen. It's a 2-part epoxy that you mix together, and it does an absolutely beautiful job of piecing plastic back together. Way better than JB Weld. Especially JB Weld Quick Weld. Quick Weld's pretty darn crap anyway. But you can see this whole corner was split, and I put it back together with plastic weld, and it's holding just fine. So that's pretty much all the functions of this thing. Now it's time to demonstrate it. Now, there were a few things that I had to do to this thing to get it working. First of all, the loading belt had gone hard and wouldn't grip anymore. The first time I tested this thing, it actually did work, but after a few loads and unloads, the belt decided it was just not going to grip anymore. So I replaced that belt, and that solved that problem. Luckily, all the other important belts are still okay. The tape counter did not work originally, and that was because there's actually 2 belts that drive the tape counter. One goes from the take-up spindle to the first part of the counter mechanism, and then there's another belt that goes from that pulley to what actually drives the counter itself. And it was that second belt that was slipping. That belt is a round belt, and I'm waiting on a pack of assorted round belts to come from China. So I haven't replaced that belt yet. But what I did do, I tried something I never tried before. I took the belt off, and I actually boiled it. I boiled it in a rolling boil for about 5 minutes. And then after I took it out, I actually soaked it in rubber renew. Poured a little bit of rubber renew into a dish, dropped the belt in, and soaked it for 5 minutes again. And that seems to have done the trick, at least for now. The tape counter is working now. Once in a great while, it does get stuck. Usually when it's rolling over the hundredths place, so going from 99 to 100 or 999 to 0, that's when it gets stuck. But that's only once in a while. On the whole, it seems to work pretty darn good. But someday, once my round belt kit comes, I may decide to change that belt out again. It was tricky figuring out how to, because both of the tape counter belts are captive. So you actually have to remove the tape counter to get those belts out, and you actually have to disassemble it a little bit. I did figure out how to do that. I won't do it again on here for demonstration, but I do intend on taking the cover off so you guys can see inside. And when I do that, I will point out and explain what I did to replace the tape counter belt. The other issue I had with the tape counter was that whenever I rewound or fast forwarded a tape, it would howl. One of the pulleys would make a howling noise. And at first I thought this was just the crappy tape I was using in the VCR, but then I realized it wasn't. I was worried that it was one of the reels, like the take-up spindle. And then I listened closer and realized that it was actually the tape counter. It was the first pulley, the pulley that the belt goes around that comes off the take-up spindle. The pulley was just howling in its, in the locations that it mounts and spins about. And I just applied some oil, and that fixed that problem. The idlers were slipping, so fast forward only worked so-so, rewind worked really poorly. I cleaned there's actually two idler tires in this thing. There's two rubber idlers. And I basically cleaned both of them first with my little, general household Lysol-esque cleaner, which I have a 1:1 dilution with water. First I cleaned the idlers with that, and then I used a Q-tip with Rubber Renew and applied Rubber Renew to them. And that got that working, so fast forward and rewind is perfect on this now. The pinch roller in this, it's not great. It's not bad like a Hitachi. It's not rock hard or cracked or anything like that. It's just not that rubbery anymore. It's kind of smooth. But I did apply some Rubber Renew to the pinch roller, and it's fine. It's fine enough that it's not causing any issues. So I shouldn't have to replace the pinch roller on this thing, which is great. And then there was one more issue this thing had that actually resolved itself. But for a couple of days, I thought the opposite had happened. I thought it was working fine, and then it broke. How did I manage that one? Well, what happened was, when I first got this thing, it was behaving exactly like you would expect a VCR to behave. And then all of a sudden, I lost audio at the line in. If I began recording something off the line in, I would get the audio out of my monitor. And when I played a tape, I would get audio, also no issue. But when the VCR was just sitting idle, there was no audio in the AV input. You'd get audio in the RF input, but not in the AV input. And I thought something had gone wrong. I didn't know if the internal record play switch had broken or if some other electronic failure had happened. I sprayed the hell out of the internal record play switches and worked the hell out of them, and it didn't solve anything. And it took asking about it on Facebook and somebody knowledgeable to inform me that that's how these early VCRs are designed to work. The AV input, because they only imagined you using it for a video camera, is silent when the VCR is idle. You cannot hear what's coming in the AV input until you hit record. And when I first got this thing, I guess the record play switches were dirty such that I was hearing record audio when I shouldn't have been, and then it cleared up on its own, and now it's working as it should. So yeah, if you hook something into the AV input on this and you don't hear anything out of your TV, that's normal. You won't hear anything until you hit record. You don't have to hit record and play, as if you're actually going to make a recording. You only have to hit record. So if I ever had this thing in an actual, setup for watching stuff on TV, and this was connected to the video source, and my TV was connected to the output of this, I would have to hit record and just have record be hit all the time in order to hear the audio. That's just how these things worked. Kind of funny. Other than that, it was just doing a lot of cleaning. There was a lot of dust and dirt inside here, and I basically cleaned it up as best I could. I lubricated the mechanism, the slides that the two guides load the tape on. I lubricated those with lithium grease. I also lubricated a couple of the loading gears with lithium grease, and that actually increased the loading and unloading performance quite a bit. It loads and unloads a lot faster after greasing it than it did before I greased it. And I would highly recommend, if you get one of these, that you do take the initiative to lubricate the mechanical parts if you can, because there's only one real mechanical fault that happens to these, and that's that one of the loading gears likes to break. And if that happens, your only hope is to either buy a whole nother machine to steal the gear off of, which you might break it in the process of transporting that gear over, or you can 3D print a gear, which I did hear about somebody who did do that, and it did work. And I think the 3D printer model is actually available for that, which is fantastic. But mine luckily has not broken. I hope it does not break. And That's why I highly recommend you lubricate these, is to reduce that stress on the loading gears during the loading and unloading of the tape. So, at last, let's turn this thing on. Get our red power light. And there's a couple of things to note here. First of all, the incandescent sensor light that lights up the, I guess this is the best view, that lights up the tape end sensors, you know, the clear part of a tape. On modern VCRs, that's infrared. That light is always there, but you don't see it because it's infrared. Well, on these early machines, that was an incandescent bulb. That's another failure that can happen on these, is the bulb burns out. If it does, the machine becomes completely inoperable. However, that bulb can be replaced. You can replace it with another incandescent bulb or with an LED, apparently some people have done. I do not know how to replace it or how much work is involved, so I hope I never have to worry about that. The other thing is what happens, or more specifically, what doesn't happen when you turn this thing on. On the first two RCA Vhs Vcrs, the VBT200 in 1977 and the VCT200 in 1978, turning on the VCR actually makes the head drum spin up. The head drum spins up and runs all the time as long as power is turned on, even if a tape's not in it on those early machines. It started with the VCT201 that they stopped doing that, and so this machine is more like a modern VCR in that it doesn't do that. But I think that's so hilarious that the VBT200 and VCT200 do that. Also, the head drum is hilarious to listen to on those early machines when it spins up, because obviously the servo circuits were very crude at that time, and so the head drum does a lot of revving and hunting before it settles on the final speed. So it's kind of funny, but this machine doesn't have that stuff. They had refined that by the time this machine came out. So, let me put in a tape. I've actually got a super VHS tape here. Same stuff, just made to a higher standard, higher grade of material. And we will turn our TV set on. Hey, it's the Sony CVM1271 that I introduced in our last video. So our TV's turned on, we're tuned to channel 3, and the select switch here, it's set to TV right now, so this is actually just watching its own TV tuner. It's not watching the TV tuner of the VCR. It's basically watching whatever's going in the RF input of the VCR. But if I set it to VCR, we're now watching what's on the AV input, because that's my current input selection. And you're seeing this pattern because I actually have the Kramer VGA to composite converter box hooked up to the AV input of this thing, because I actually made my test recordings off the computer. CHCO TV now has a 24/7 live stream on their website. So if you ever wanted to watch CHCO, but you don't live in Canada, or you do live in Canada, but you don't have a TV service that carries it, you can go to chco.tv and watch it. There's a little plug there. But I made my test recordings off of that stream, off the computer. So you're just seeing the Kramer's test pattern here. And it's kind of neat. If I turn the power switch off, you can see the select switch is mechanically put back to TV. And it's actually spring-loaded, you can see. And now we're back. So, my tape is in. Let me turn the microphone around so you can hear this thing. We will play my tape, play my test recording. And there we are.
Scotiabank. is pulling out, and their solution is to send their clients to St. George, which isn't a solution. Anyone that knows the island knows that when, I mean, those communities, while they might look close on a map, when folks leave Grand Banana,
and as you can see, even though it's just through the camera, this thing produces a beautiful picture. It really, really does. The only video quality issue it has, if we look right here, I don't know how well you'll be able to tell, but the picture is shifting sideways just barely. Oh, now we're switching to another recording speed. This part was recorded in LP. You can see the recording quality is still very good. But yeah, the picture shifts horizontally back and forth just like this, just the tiniest amount, just enough for someone like me to notice. When you get a direct feed playback of this thing in a moment, you won't see that horizontal shift, and I think that's because this camcorder is applying a bit of time-based correction, because that's definitely what a time-based corrector would solve, would be this little horizontal shift like this. If I actually rotate the VCR while it's playing, oh, we're going down to SLP, there's our SLP recording. If I actually harass the VCR and rotate it while it's playing, you can see the picture shifts sideways a lot. So, I don't know if maybe that's just some stale capacitors in the head drum servo, and the head drum's not keeping its speed quite as well as it might have originally. Or maybe that's how these were new. I don't know. If anybody has any ideas, you know, that tiny little horizontal jitter, let me know. But there you go. You can see even an SLP recording, really good. You can obviously see the noise. I mean, this was one of the first VCRs with SLP. Like, it's nuts. So I don't fault this thing at all if the SLP recording is kind of crap, because it was one of the first, and now we're back to SP, and honest to goodness, the recording quality of this thing is just fantastic given its age, the fact that it was stored in a non-climate controlled storage unit. Really, really great. Let me rewind a bit. So we're back at the SLP recording. So it's actually very quiet when it's playing at the LP or SLP speeds. When it goes back to SP speed here in a moment, you'll hear it get quite a bit louder. The capstan motor gets quite a bit noisier at SP speed. Doesn't sound worn or anything. I think that's just the way it was. There, now we're back at SP, and you might have been able to hear it gets, the capstan motor gets quite a bit noisier there. So, let me give you a direct feed of this recording. You'll see how all three speeds perform, and then we'll come back here.
It was just a couple of years ago when the government was looking at opening up the banking sector to more competition. Canadian banks told members of Parliament, I've written to the agency that oversees banking and banking regulation in this country, and what Scotia's doing, they're being very strategic. When our Canadian institutions like this ignore small towns, it's not like another community on the mainland. This is an island. It's an hour and a half to get to.
Listen, you're my friend.
I noticed you haven't really been yourself recently.
Yeah, I feel like something's up.
How are you?
Are you okay?
Is there anything you want to talk about?
I just want to know how you're feeling.
And listen, even if you don't know what to say, I'm here to talk.
No matter what you're going through,
I just want you to know I'm here.
I've got your back.
when you want to talk, I'm here.
New Brunswick Independent Television, CHCO-TV, Channel 26.
Well, there you go. As you can see, very good recording quality out of this thing. I'm just so surprised and so glad that it's working as well as it is. You might notice on the SLP speed there's quite a bit of flutter in the audio, but again, one of the earliest SLP capable VCRs. I don't blame it at all. Audio performance on SP and LP, really, really good. Totally happy. Well, I think it's time to do what I always do when I make a video of a VCR. Hook this camcorder to the video input, record it onto tape, and let's get a direct feed from this camcorder at how the video quality looks. Alright, we are now recording on the RCA SelectaVision Vdt625 Vcr from 1980. So here's what SP speed looks like. I've got it connected to the monitor. Get our color quality, see what that looks like. And let's move it to LP speed. Gave it a minute in case the sometimes on this thing when a recording goes from SP to LP, the capstan motor revs up a lot and it can speed through a few seconds of the recording before settling down. But we're now recording at LP speed, so you'll probably notice some degradation in the video and the audio quality. Notice I can also pause recording by just hitting the pause switch. And now it's recording again. If I had a video camera connected with the remote pause hooked up, hitting the record stop start switch on the video camera would achieve the same effect as using this. And we'll go down to SLP speed. And this is what SLP speed looks like. You should notice the audio quality to be markedly worse. And video quality might not be too much worse than LP because it does have a dedicated set of SLP heads. If this was the VDT501 where it's only 2 heads for all 3 speeds, the video quality would be much worse. And finally, let's switch back to SP speed. And now we're recording in SP speed again. And that concludes the test. Now I want to show you something kind of quirky with regards to the pause function on this thing. Let me hit pause. You can see there's our paused image, and look how beautiful that pause is. Absolutely zero noise. We are looking at one perfect field of video. And I'll talk about how it achieves that in a little bit as well. But now let me go to a part of a recording that has that was recorded in LP. Now I'm in an LP recording and see what happens when I hit pause. The picture blanks. Well, that's kind of weird. But now let's go to an SLP section. Here's the SLP section, and let me hit pause. And we get a still image again. Not as well. So why does this thing give me a still image for SP and SLP, but it blanks the screen when an LP recording is paused? Well, that's by design. It's because, of course, this thing being a 4-head unit, it's got 2 sets of heads on it. One set is optimized for SP, the other set of heads are optimized for SLP. Neither set of heads are optimized for LP. I think it just uses the SP heads. And because neither set of heads are optimized for LP, any image you would get when pausing an LP recording would be extremely poor. So Panasonic chose to just blank the image when you pause an LP recording. SP pause is great, SLP pause is acceptable, so it lets you see the freeze frame on recordings made at those speeds. Now, regarding how it got that perfect still image when I paused it in SP mode, this thing does something. These early Panasonic built machines do something really cool that that a lot of later VCRs and probably most modern VCRs don't do. And it's that when you hit pause, the capstan keeps moving a little bit until it gets a perfect image, and then it freezes. So if I go here and unpause, and I gotta let it settle. Didn't used to do this, so there might be some servo capacitors that are starting to fail. And we're going back to our SP recording. So if I hit pause, you can see it pauses, but then it's advancing again. It's trying to find, it's going field by field, trying to find a perfect field that it can settle on. And unfortunately, this does not seem to work very well on this VCR, at least for SP recordings. It does a good job finding a good picture for SLP, but as you can see, it's not really pausing at all, is it? It's just going in slow motion, looking for a perfect field of video. Oh, it almost did it. And the thing is, this didn't do this before, but it's doing it now. So between that and the fact that it hiccups a bit when you unpause from an LP or SLP recording, I have a feeling there might be some capacitors that are due for replacement on this. I guess it's best demonstrated here on an SLP recording, but if I hit pause, you can see you can see it stills the picture, but then it moves it forward just a little bit until it comes across a good image. Now, that's not a good image, but it's an SLP recording. It tried its best and then decided that was the best it could do, but let me unpause and hit pause again. And unpause. Let it steady itself. And hit pause. There, so it tried. It advanced one frame, but when it's working perfectly, the capstan motor pulls the tape ahead just field by field until it comes across a good field of video. And then it stops there. It tries, but it can't really do it on SLP. It does a really good job on SP, or at least it did when I first got this thing, but now we're back on an SP recording, and when I hit pause, it just doesn't want to settle on a field. It just keeps pulling the video forward indefinitely. So I wonder if there's a slow tracking adjustment that might affect that, like on the inside maybe. I just fixed my pause issue for SP recordings. If I hit pause, there, you can see it finds a frame to settle on pretty quickly. Let's try that again. Once it stabilizes, I might have to adjust the capstan free run and hit pause. There, that's not bad. Still not as good as what I saw a 12 volts vids unit do. He worked on this same model of VCR, and his was able to come across a still frame pretty darn quickly. But that's not bad. At least it stops now instead of just going in slow motion forever. There, that's not bad. So how I did it was, once you take the back cover off, there's some adjustment pots here. Here's the two that are accessible with the back cover on, and they adjust basically how the picture looks when you're paused. VLock 1 adjusts it for SP, and VLock 2 adjusts it for SLP, and it's basically adjusts how clear the picture is. Up here, there's a pot, FA Adjust 1. That's Frame Adjust 1, Frame Advance Adjust 1, rather. And that basically, at least to me, without having a service manual to look at, that seems to adjust how quickly the frame advance goes, and it affects the automatic frame advance that it does when it looks for a good still image in pause. So I turned that down so it slows down a heckin' bit and stops and smells the roses, and that seems to make it be able to look for a better still frame more quickly. Actually, by the looks of it, I might stand to be able to slow it down just a little bit more. So let's try that. I'll slow it down just a little bit more, and let's try it again. There, that was pretty good. Let's try it again. There. That's working pretty good. There. That's what I like to see. And there. All that noise when I unpause. That's the capstan running too slowly. So I might adjust the capstan free run. There, that still frame, that gets to a still frame a lot better now. So I'm glad that I sorted that out. Here's the inside of the unit. Here's the power supply section, a linear power supply, of course, with a relatively huge transformer. And there's the mechanism, which is still kind of dirty. I did my best to clean it up, but there's your head drum with 4 heads on it, you can see. Here's our capstan motor. And open this up. In there, you can see the 2 rubber idlers. So I will put a tape in. And there you go. And if I hit pause, oh, guess it's not going to do it that time. There. You can see how the capstan motor twitches a little bit to move the tape just a little bit to get to that still frame. I'm so enamored by this feature because modern VCRs, so many modern VCRs don't have it. Why? I don't know. It seems so obvious. And I think even earlier units were doing this, like maybe the VBT200 was even doing this in 1977. So there you go. So to deal with the tape counter issue, if you look in there, you can see the belt that goes from the take-up spindle to the first pulley. And in order to remove the tape counter so that you can remove either of the 2 belts, because the second belt is in there, you have to remove this screw and remove the whole timer module. It slides either back or forwards and then lifts up. Easy to do. And then there is, I think, just that 1 screw, and then there's another screw on the side to remove the second set of pulleys to get the second belt out. That screw there you can leave alone. Actually, this part of the counter assembly stays put, and you're just removing the pulley assembly. And then it was actually this first pulley there in the center of the screen that was howling, and once I got that first pulley out, I was able to remove it. I think it was howling about this white cream colored plastic piece. I think that's what it was actually howling against. So I was able to remove the pulley and oil it and got everything functioning nicely again, and the counter 90% working. Here's the underside of the unit, and once you take the screws out of the circuit board carriers, they swing open like doors. This thing is a nightmare inside, but it was built with serviceability in mind. You can see all the belts in there. Luckily all these belts were good. It was just that belt right there that I had to change. Take a look at the flat belt, the capstan belt. It's huge. Very big belt. I don't know how you'd find a replacement for that if you had to. I suppose maybe a turntable belt might fit. I don't know. There's the head drum. I'll press play so you can see what it looks like. I spent a few minutes playing with the Capstan free run trimmers, which are that one for SP, that one for LP, and this one for EP. The Capstan free run is basically how fast the VCR moves the tape when it doesn't know how fast to move the tape. And it's an important part of the VCR being able to lock on to moving the tape at the proper speed. A VCR knows how fast to play a tape by listening to the control track. The clock pulses on that track tell the VCR how fast the tape needs to move, because there's a standardized rate at which those clock pulses tick. But in the second or 2 seconds or fraction of a second that it's playing a tape, it hasn't gathered enough information from the control track to determine how fast to play the tape yet. So until then, it's basically going in open loop, and it guesses how fast to move the tape, and the Capstan free run trimmers adjust that. So my one for SP was good. I adjusted the LP and EP ones so that when I have it paused like this and I unpause, it's not sitting there for several seconds trying to figure out how fast to play the tape. So this is SP, and that was already working pretty good, although I did tinker with it a little bit just to make sure that it was still good. And now we're going into LP. So that's LP, and I'll pause it, and I'll unpause it. And that's pretty good. That's better than what it was doing before. That's pretty decent. And I'll just wait for it to go to EP here. And that's EP. And that's pretty good as well. Yep, that's doing much better than it was. Hey, how about we see how the audio dub function works? I have my Audio-Technica AT9100 dynamic microphone plugged into the mic jack. No idea if this thing can take a dynamic microphone or if it needs a condenser microphone, but we'll find out.
Written to the agency that oversees.
Yes, this is an episode of Southwest Magazine on CHCO television, and here we see New Brunswick Southwest Member of Parliament John Williamson talking about various issues surrounding various Charlotte County communities.
Royal Bank ATM at the Penfield Irving for.
I've got it all back together now, and hey, I found the little black felt insert that's supposed to go behind the memory switch. It fell out when I opened up the bottom. I knew it must have been somewhere. Anyhow, guys, that's about all there is to show of the RCA SelectaVision model Vdt625 Vhs Vcr from 1980. What a cool, awesome piece of vintage video equipment. I am so happy that I found this thing 2 years ago for a really affordable price, and I am happy and amazed that it works just fine. Is it perfect? No. Could it probably use some new caps in some places? Maybe. But is it working pretty damn good for a 42-year-old VCR? Oh, heck yeah. This thing's cool, and this thing's a keeper. Holy cow. After the experience I had with my VFT 650, I wasn't sure if I was ever gonna, get a working early top-loader VCR. But now I have one, and I think it's pretty darn cool. I dream of hopefully someday living in a bigger place, a place big enough where I would love to have a console television set, or at least, you know, something like an RCA XL100 or something like that. And boy howdy, wouldn't this thing look so cool on top of a 70s or 80s floor model TV. Boy, that would just be the bee's knees, I tell you what. I hope someday I can achieve that. But until then, that's it for this thing. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. A big thanks to my Patreon supporters as well. Their contributions help support the things that I do, and your guys' viewership helps as well, so I really appreciate it. So that's all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.